JBR Podcast.
Wake up and check it out.
Where the music and life connects. Let's go.
Today we got Simon Jarrett on the podcast. He's the guy behind some of the most sought after amps and pedals in the guitar world. We're going to talk about how he got started, his journey into the gear world, what keeps him creating all this awesome stuff. But before we get into talking about your pedals, Simon, let's talk about the Kingsley amps, because I've been using your amps for almost 20 years now, and every gig I play, no matter where I am, I get complimented on my tone. And the first thing awesome. I want to know is, are you still making amps?
I mean, well, hey, James. Yeah, how's it going? Thanks for doing this with me here. Yeah, amps. I mean, in theory, I'm making amps. I just don't get a lot of time to do it. So, you know, I did make a couple a little while back, but I was making them like all the time, and that was kind of my business. And then a few years ago, I got into this pedal building business, and that just turned out to be, you know, a better business for us and easier to set up and run and stuff. And it just made more sense. So I just naturally kind of gravitated that way. So I do still have the facility to make amps, and, you know, once in a blue moon I'll make one, you know. But yeah, it's not like I've got a long wait list of guys who would like amps, and I can't figure out in my life how to schedule it all and make it happen. So in theory, you know, I want to figure that out, but for now it's mainly pedals.
Mainly pedals. Yeah. And I hear myself, I'm not a huge pedal guy, but I've heard from so many guys everywhere when they see the amps and they go, Kingsley, oh my gosh, you know, that guy's so great. And then they're shocked that we live in the same town.
Yeah. Yeah. Right on. Well, you know, it's funny, right? Because you're such a great example of a great player. And I'm thrilled that you've been using, you know, one of my amps for this long, James. That's awesome. You know, I do love the sort of plugging straight into an amp approach, the kind of purist, you know, plug in and play, you know, and that's the real stuff. And, you know, so kudos to you for doing that. You know, us mere mortals who need, like, you know, safety blankets and stuff, you know, we got to rely on all the gadgets and flashing lights, you know, because when we don't know what to play anymore, we just step on something, right? And hopefully a different sound comes out.
Yeah, and I know we're talking about your amps and your pedals, but you're a monster player too, like blues player.
Thank you, James.
You're one of those guitar players like we should hate, because you play everything really good. And usually a guy that's all rounded, he's okay at blues, okay at jazz, but you're like a monster at all of those things. So.
Well, you know, the question is it, you know, are you a Renaissance man, or are you a jack of all trades and master of none? And I think it's probably the latter. But
no, I think you're like a master of them all. That's what's disturbing to a guy like me. Because
I wish. No, what I really like and really respect about your approach is that, you know, you know what you do and you do it really well. And so it just sounds authentic, and everything's like you mean it, right? So that's and that always comes across, right? And that's what's most important, I think, in music, right? So
no, I appreciate that.
I have huge respect for people such as yourself, who you know, they have a kind of path they're going down, and they play. You know, I'm not saying that there's anything lacking in your playing. You're an amazing player, but you don't feel necessarily the need to kind of, you know, pretend like you have to do this style and that style and all that kind of stuff, right? And I think that's if I think of a lot of great guitar players, you know, and great musicians, you know, they didn't have to prove anything. They did what they did, and that's why we love them, right?
For sure.
So
for sure.
You're doing something right.
Yeah, I'm using a Kingsley amp, and I feel like I don't need anything, because it's seriously like just plug and play. It's quite crazy. So what pedals do you offer?
Well, you know, what happened is through the years of making amps, I started to make amps with 2 channels. And so, well, first of all, you know, a lot of the early amps, they didn't have 2 channels per se, but maybe they had 2 inputs like yours does. And you can plug into one for a cleaner sound, and you can plug into the other input for a bit more gain, a bit more breakup, right? And so eventually that turned into another amp with 2 separate channels entirely, right? You'd have a foot switch and you go between the 2 sounds. And, you know, channel switching amps is nothing new, right? They've been out for a long time. But what happened is I just started to look at the way the second channel worked to get like a nice lead tone, and thought, well, I'd like to put that in a box, and so I figured out how to make the first tube pedals, and the first one I made was called the Jester, and it was essentially modeled loosely after the overdrive channel of one of my amps. And so that's kind of how it started, right? And the Jester was pretty good for us, and then over the years I started to offer different models. I honestly, it's kind of silly, but I honestly don't know how many different pedals I make now, because what's happened is, just like I came out of the sort of the custom amp world, and I got a little bit into the custom pedal world, and so you start making all these variations. And so I couldn't tell you how many there are, but there's way too many. Even if you look at the website, there's a list of too many pedals there. Nobody can use them all at once, right? It's like, but there you go.
Yeah.
That's
And I did check it out, and I was like, holy smokes, I had no idea. I knew about the Jester and the Minstrel and some of those kind of things. But yeah, it looked like you're doing custom. So how does that work? Like, when somebody contacts you, do they just give you kind of an idea of what they're looking for, and you can just make that happen?
I mean, I'm not. I should caveat that by saying I'm not really doing a lot of custom stuff. I was doing like complete custom builds, and I had to scale that back just because there was no way to fit it into the day, with along with building the other pedals, that my kind of standard pedals which I offer, like the Jester and the Page and the Bard. And so the custom pedals, basically, usually what would happen is, either I would have an idea for a different product, and rather than going out and getting new enclosures made by a metal fabricator or something, I just use an existing enclosure and stick a faceplate on it with some new labeling, and come up with a new design. And that was sort of like a custom pedal. So sometimes that's the way it works. If I want to bring out, test a design, I'll make a pedal using that method, so I don't have to invest in, I don't have to invest in the fabrication and all that stuff. But other times what happens is customers will contact me and say, hey, you made me a Page a couple of years back, and I really like it, but do you think you could do this? I want a little bit more extended top end, or I want a little bit less mids or whatever. So sometimes I'll go, yeah, I can probably do that, and if it works out well, and if it's different enough, that can sometimes become a new product itself. So it's just, nothing was planned, right? It's just like things just happen, and people would email me and stuff, and I'd come up with these different models. Initially I was just doing all my own designs, overdrives, boosts, a tremolo. And then after a while, I started to make preamplifiers, which were sort of inspired by classic amps, like preamps modeled after Fender Blackface amps, and after Marshall Plexi amps and Vox AC30s and stuff like that. So now we have a whole line of preamps, which are essentially the front end of these classic guitar amplifiers. And guys will take those and they'll run them into a power amp, or these days, because everybody's got a computer and an audio interface, a lot of people are recording at home, of course, and so they'll use them as a recording tool. So they'll plug the guitar into it and off into their interface and into Logic or something, and as long as you have some kind of speaker simulation software, or maybe hardware, there's lots of devices out there which do that as well, then you can get pretty good tones direct, without having to even plug into an actual amp. It's kind of heresy, I know, not to actually plug into a real amp, but unfortunately, that's the way the world's going, James. I don't know what to say.
It is, and I work in tech outside of the music industry in terms of web development and app development and marketing and all this kind of stuff. But I've never really done much of it on the music side of it, so I understand tech. But yeah, it blows me away that you can hear some of these digital sounds that you can't even tell the difference of whether or not it's a tube amp on a stage or going through a computer.
Yeah. I mean, we've all got our biases and stuff like that, but I'm still like pretty much a pretty diehard kind of tube amp guy, so even though I offer these pedals, they still have tubes in them, and the ideal situation for me is you still plug them into a real tube power amp. It's just that I'm splitting up the parts of an amp into separate units, right? So if you think of a guitar amplifier as a preamp and a power amp and a speaker, right? So I'm just allowing you to kind of access those bits separately, right? A modular approach. So guys will take different preamps and either they'll plug them into a dedicated tube power amplifier and into their choice of speakers, or sometimes they'll do, like I say, they'll run into a cabinet simulator and then run it front of house like that. You know, people like silent stages these days, and they don't want, you know, you go into bars these days and you don't even know there's a band on stage, you know, because you can't hear it except through the overhead speakers. It's kind of weird. But yeah, so there's all sorts of applications for these devices. But yeah, I'm still, you know, as much as the digital world is amazing, and there are some great studio tools, I'm still kind of, even though I make all this stuff, I still like the old school approach best. Stick a mic in front of an amp, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And your ears are like way more sophisticated, I think, than mine in terms of, you know, all the tones that you're getting out of things. I've, you know, played the same guitar and basically your same Kingsley amp since probably, I think it was 2005. You lent me that amp when I opened for the T-Birds at the Commodore, because my amps had all fallen apart, and I was like, I need
Is
a
that
new
what
amp. And
happened? Yeah, thanks for reminding me of that. Wow, yeah.
Yeah, I took that. I can't remember. I think it's the one maybe Chris Rowland has right now, or
Yeah,
one of
maybe.
those.
Chris has the very first Kingsley I ever made. Yeah.
Then that's the
Yeah.
one, because
It's all beat
the
up and it looks
112,
kind of strange, right? But it's
and
kind of
it's red.
a unique one. It's red. Yeah, it sounds kind of
Yeah,
cool, you know?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think that's the same amp. And then when I played the Commodore, I was like, holy, that's the best tone I've ever felt, and I never looked back.
Awesome. Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate that you came to me and I got to make you an amp, and that you're still using it. That's a thrill for me because, as I say,
Yeah.
big respect to your
And I don't know
guitar.
if you remember, but I have two, because I had the Deluxe 30
Yeah.
all in the combo, and then
Yeah.
that got stolen with
That's
my
right.
guitar. And
Yeah.
then I came to you, and that's why I asked if you were making amps, because that was probably around the time you maybe were making the transition to pedals, because there was a major long wait list and you didn't seem to be doing it as often. But you made me that Bailey 15
Right.
head and then a
Okay.
212 cab. I
Okay.
wanted
Yeah, that's right.
to
Yeah.
so now I still have both,
Excellent.
and
Good man.
play those. But
Cool.
yeah, and getting back to your pedals though, which is your most popular pedal?
I have a pedal called the Page. Let's see. Here's one, and it's a 3-knob pedal, gain, volume, and tone, and it's basically like a boost slash mild overdrive. And the nice thing about it is it's got a nice feel under the fingers. It feels kind of like you're plugged into a tube amp. And if you have amps which sound really good at a certain point, which is sometimes maybe too loud, it's nice to put this in front of the amp, and you can set your amp a little bit quieter and use this to get that kind of feel and slight compression, edge of breakup kind of when you dig in sound, right? So it's a fairly subtle pedal, but it's super popular for us. It seems to work well for people, and yeah, that's it. That's probably the most popular one we do.
Wow. And then what are some of the other pedals that you're moving, that and what do those do? What are the use cases
Yeah,
for
I've got
those?
too many variations on the same theme, I have to confess. Let's see. So after the Page, I've got a pedal called the Minstrel, which is just like a sort of medium gain overdrive with gain, volume, treble, middle, and bass. And that's kind of like a middle of the road overdrive pedal. Has quite a bit more gain on tap than the Page. And then I have the Jester, which has an overdrive circuit, and then it has a separate clean boost circuit. So you can run them individually or you can combine them. Then I have the Bard, which is a tube tremolo. And that one's that's nice because it's an old school tremolo based on the bias modulating circuit, similar to what you might find in some vintage Tweed amps, and a couple of other Fender amps like the Vibro Champ and the Princeton use a similar circuit. So that's the Bard. And then I've got a couple of dedicated boost pedals. I've got one called the Peasant, which is just like 2 knobs, volume and input impedance, and it's great for pushing an amp harder. Or maybe you've got a guitar which doesn't have very hot pickups and you just want to be able to push your amp a bit harder. Or maybe you've got an overdrive pedal that you want some more gain out of and you stick this in front of it. There's a whole bunch, and they're all on the website. So, yeah.
I'm looking right now at your Bard, because that's probably the only pedal I personally use is to add a little bit of tremolo to it. So
yeah.
Maybe
Yeah,
we'll
I think
be
you'd like
talking
the
offline.
Bard, James. You should check one.
Yeah.
I should give you one to check out.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely interested and like what you've done enough. I'm pretty much sold on having one, and I do have one now that I use, and it's okay.
Oh yeah,
Gets
right
me
on. Well, there's
gets me
so
through the
many
live
too,
shows.
right? That's the thing about the pedal market. It's kind of crazy. It's just like it seems like it's saturated because everybody and their uncle's making pedals. It's like other sort of internet businesses that you can get started relatively easily and try to make a go of it. And I've been lucky that the products that we make are a little bit kind of niche. They're a little bit different than your average pedals because they have tubes in them, and a lot of people and manufacturers don't want the hassle of going down that. There's various things that you have to do to put tubes in pedals, and so probably scares a lot of people off. And other people go, well, I don't need tubes in pedals. I've got tubes in my amp, so it's all good.
Yeah.
But there's tons of great solid state pedals and tremolos out there for sure. Yeah. Which one do you use?
What am I using right now? I think it's called a Jackrabbit.
Oh, is that Sir Jackrabbit?
Sir. Yeah, Sir
Yeah,
Jackrabbit.
yeah.
That's
John Sir. Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
talented guy. He makes tons of amazing stuff.
Yeah.
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 Cool.
I tried a bunch out, and again, I don't know a lot, and I just tried out what was available to me at the time and thought, oh, that one sounded the best for me. And
Right. Yeah. That's, I'm sure that's a great one. I have no doubt because pretty much everything he makes is really good.
yeah. And everything you make is really great.
Well,
that's why I'm going to be coming and check out one of those Bards.
Yeah. You should check it out anyway. Yeah.
So
Cool.
yeah, like as we mentioned before, you're a guitar player and you play a bunch of different styles of music and stuff. So like, what was your background that got you into, making amps that ultimately got you into the pedals?
Yeah. Well, when I was in high school, I was tinkering a little bit with electronics. Back then, well before internet days, I'd buy like electronics magazines and look up little electronics projects like how to make a headphone amp or a fuzz pedal, and I had a friend whose brother was good at that, and he knew how to solder well and stuff, and got some tips from him, and just started there. And then you get the bug, and you start making stuff, and then you start swapping pickups and guitars, and so then that just kind of never went away. All the time I was just mainly wanting to really play guitar, so I was always a guitar player, but that was kind of a fun side thing that I would do as well. And then over the years, I was doing a lot of teaching and gigging out here. We moved out here when I was in my early 20s, I guess. And then I started tinkering again with electronics. And I used to do a lot of fixing of old Fenders and Voxes and Marshall amps and stuff like that on the side. And eventually I just started to, in fact, but pre-internet era, my folks were still in Europe. At the time they were living in Belgium, but also in the UK. And we'd make trips over there, and we couldn't really afford to go back and forth as a young family. So what I do is when I got over there, I'd buy up an old Vox AC30 for a pretty good deal if I could find one. And I'd bring it back here. I'd have to do work on the amp, like change the filter caps and check it all out and stuff. And then I'd sell it if I could and hopefully make something to, put towards our flights. So I was doing that a little bit. And that's kind of really what kickstarted the sort of whole interest in amps. I started to buy and sell these amps and learn all about what makes them tick, And so then that led to me eventually gutting some amps that were no good anymore and starting to build my own circuits in them. And and that eventually I started to make pedals and amps. And named them Kingsley. I didn't know what else to call it because that's my middle name, so it seemed appropriate. So there you go.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask where Kingsley came from. So it comes from your middle name. That's
Right.
cool.
Yeah.
There's some sentimental stuff there. And at what point did the Kingsley amps, kind of blow up to where, because people are waiting 6 months, 12 months plus to get an amp.
Yeah. I mean, well, honestly, I mean, what happened is what kind of put them on the map at all was I had made a handful of them, and then I sent one to Guitar Player magazine back in 2001. And that was when I just started to make the Deluxe 30. And I sent them a Deluxe 30 and waited months and months and nothing happened. But eventually they reviewed it and they gave it a really good write-up. And that was it. That kind of really helped out, and then all of a sudden we had phone calls and a few people started sending us checks in the mail and stuff like this, and suddenly we were like, oh my goodness. And, we didn't have a website or anything. And so we had to figure out how to put it all together, and it just happened,
Yeah.
So then I started to make these Deluxe 30s, and eventually that turned into some other offerings like the Deluxe 32 I was describing before. I went to a 2-channel amp, Then I came up with the Deluxe 50 watts, 2 6L6 tubes rather. And it just expanded from there, and it just kept going and going. And that's kind of how it all started.
And then and what made you transition into pedals from doing that?
I don't know what made me do it other than, I was using pedals at the time, and I had I had been using a Tube Screamer, and I had a Proco Rat and a few other ones, and an Ibanez delay pedal and stuff like this, right? So I had a few pedals that I take to my gigs, and I was making these tube amps. And as I say, then I just kind of figured, well, I've always liked the sound of tubes overdriving. So how could I kind of just put that in a box and put it on the floor and be able to put it in front of a cleaner amp, so I could just step on it and get nice tube overdrive. And so that's what made me make the first pedals, right? And that's what hence brought about the Jester overdrive pedal, which became our first one. And that's all really. I was using pedals, and I figured, well, there was a couple of other tube pedals on the market. There've been some over the years, right? Like, for example, the Tube Driver, which is a very famous pedal, tube overdrive that people like David Gilmour and Eric Johnson have used and continue to use, I think. And then Matchless had the Matchless Hotbox. There was a few other ones. There was a Gaiatone one. I think even Ibanez had one back in the day, and Maxon. So there was a few other people doing it, So I just decided to give it a bash, and it worked out, and it wasn't that hard to do, So here I am, years later, still doing the same old thing,
I love it.
Driving the neighbors crazy,
oh.
testing pedals every day.
And I love how you're just like, and it wasn't that hard to do.
It's not like in a way it's a certain thing, you got to kind of know what you're looking for tonally, and you got to figure out how to make it happen. So there's a little bit of circuit design and understanding of electronics, but it's not like rocket science. It's not like it's way simpler, in terms of circuit design than all the digital stuff that's going on. It's really like what I do is I take simple circuits and figure out how to tweak them as much as I can, like to the nth degree to get a certain effect. Like the Page pedal I was showing you, right? It's a super simple circuit, right? But if you get it right and you do it well, I know what to expect from an amp when it's working right, and just like you do, how it responds to the touch, right? And so I wanted, even though I was going down this pedal route, I wanted to maintain that thing that musicians and good guitar players appreciate. It's not just about the sound, like we were talking about how you can get all these amazing digital products, and sometimes you can't tell the difference between that and a real amp if you're just listening to a recording, right? Mm-hmm. But I think where they're still perhaps missing out a little bit is in that feel thing under the fingers,
Yeah, there's something to be said for finger tones, and they'll say 90% of your tone is in the hands, but it is in the gear too. When you go out and play, what's your favorite pieces of gear in terms of amp and pedals? Like, what's your setup when you go out and play a gig?
It varies a lot, honestly, I don't gig very much these days. I wish I would gig some more, but I've just got to make that happen more. That's my own fault, really. But when I do go out and gig, I usually take way too much stuff because I make this stuff and I figure out, well, I'm going to go and use it, So people think I'm crazy bringing all this gear into the venue. But I've got a couple of different pedal boards. I was using this massive one for a while and I scaled that back. I've got a smaller one now, but it's still got a bunch on it. So it has a preamp on it called the Juggler, which is like modeled after a Dumble ODS amp. So that's kind of my main tone in that pedal, which then pushes a power amp. And the power amp I use is actually, like a lot of guys, they have amplifiers which have effects loops. And so if you have an effects loop on your amp, it's got an effects send and it's got an effects return. Well, the effects return is an access point into your power amplifier. So what you can do is you can plug these preamps into the return, and that way you can get different preamplifier sounds directly into the power amp. So I usually take one of my amps, which is a full functional amp on its own, but I tend to run my pedals into the effects return. So that way I have control of everything on the floor, right? So I got a couple of pedals. I got that. I got the Bard. I've got a delay pedal. I just picked up this Keeley Halo pedal, which is a really nice delay pedal. So I've got a little tube fuzz pedal I make now, so I use that. And then I got a tuner, I got an old Arion chorus, which I use for a kind of faux Leslie kind of warbly thing, Actually, cool. I just picked up a real Leslie, but I haven't got it working yet. I have to get it working, and it's way too big to take to the gig, so I still used a little pedal, But you must use you must have used like a Fender Vibratone over the years and stuff, right?
I have a Leslie Model 16.
Nice, yeah.
From 1969, but it's a little awesome. Much to it's got that foam rotating thing in front of the speaker, and it's great, but it's a lot to lug around.
Yeah, so for sure. Yeah,
that's why I got that Sur kind of pedal and stuff.
Right.
But in regards to your gear, what genre or types of players do you think benefit the most from it? Because it sounds to me like, I guess it's all around. It wouldn't matter if somebody's playing blues, jazz, country, pop.
Yeah, it really. I think the pedal world is so. The pedals are just ways to get different tones, right? It's just like. So it's not limited to any one style, really. I would say, if you're certainly if you're the kind of player who's playing a variety of music, and you have to, like, if you're in a cover band and you have to cover different tones, then usually those guys have quite a few pedals. If they want to carry, they might want to cover anything from sort of Jimi Hendrix to Van Halen to Eric Clapton to whatever, right? So they use pedals for that. So your regular gigging top 40 star guitar player, but also just any gigging musician, be they blues players, like Matt Schofield uses our pedals. He's a blues player, right? Joey Landreth, and those guys get great tone, and they're great blues players, well, Joey Landreth isn't necessarily a blues player, but definitely a lot of blues in there. And I don't know of pretty much any. There's very few guitar players who use no pedals. I mean, I know that you don't really use pedals much, but so there are people. I mean, I think probably Carlos Santana. I don't think Eric Clapton uses a pedal, does he? I don't know. I saw him play earlier this year in June in France, and I think he just plugged straight in his amp. Sounded that way anyway. But so there are people who don't use any pedals, for sure. I don't know. Maybe jazz players don't really use them, like traditional jazz players. Mm-hmm. I mean, guys who do more modern stuff or kind of fusion-y kind of stuff, like Schofield and, Larry Carlton, Robin Ford, and all those guys, they definitely are heavily into pedal land. Yeah,
for sure.
We'll convert you still, James. We'll convert you.
No, and I'm all for it. I feel like I'll just have a few too many wobbly pops and trip over them on stage and look like a total idiot or something. And the pedal that I do use kind of just sits on my amp, and I kind of set it and forget it, like the Showtime barbecue. Nice. In terms of like people now having some more interest in your pedals, they can go to your website. I know on your website you have some videos of where you've played some guitar and kind of sampled out the tones.
Yeah, there's quite a few videos on there, and there's other videos that are not on the site, but maybe just floating around on YouTube. You can usually find some clips, and then there's you can contact me through the website and ask questions by email or give me a call, and we can discuss things. And if you want a pedal, chances are I'll be able to make you one. Yeah.
So how does somebody order one? Do you have on your site, do you have a checkout process that they just order one and you send it, or do they have to contact you?
We make it in pretty small quantities, right? So literally just it's through email and telephone, old fashioned, just like vacuum tubes.
That's great. Yeah, that's great.
So I take a guy's credit card number, and when it's ready to ship, and then we pop it in the mail,
And that's KingsleyAmplifiers.com, right?
You got it. KingsleyAmplifiers.com. Yeah. Yeah, that's
okay.
it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you taking the time to, get us up to date on what you're doing with your pedals. Like just me personally, my selfishness here. I know we don't get the opportunity to see each other as much as we used to.
I know it's kind of silly, right? Because we're in the same town and everything. And where are you playing these days?
I'm doing some stuff at the Anovitz out actually this Saturday. Got a jam out there. Yeah, jam awesome. From 3 to 7. I did a show, not with Chris, but he was playing there. Out in Chilliwack. So, a lot of private party things and a few venues. I'll be going to Calgary next month for a few shows, and I usually drive out there so I can drag my amp with me.
Yeah, not have nice. Do you do the Dudney pub? Do you play there sometimes?
Yeah, I was there a few weeks ago, and usually there, I don't know, over the last 6 months, probably once a month, once every month.
I'll have to look out for when you're playing and come and see you. That'd be fun. It's been too long.
For sure. And I know you play with Chris quite a bit. So I had mentioned to him, the three of us should just do a little trio thing and go sit in the back of a coffee shop just to,
totally.
Just to play some guitar. So I need more, I need more than the 3 licks I know.
That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. So KingsleyAmplifiers.com, they can get a hold of you, check out some of the tones that are going on, as well as YouTube. I'll get some of your socials up on here. If there's anything other than your site, you can send that to me and we'll get it going to people. And I appreciate you taking the time to give us a little bit of a history lesson on how things came about and where they're going at these days. And things, I've been hearing a lot of great things, which is why I wanted to get you on the podcast here
Well, thank you.
So once again, I appreciate it. And we'll keep in touch a little bit more than we have in the past.
Yeah, we must do. Yeah, sounds good.